Please, don't leave me down here." Jacob Thompson had bought this land for the water. He hadn't expected to find a living woman locked beneath the kitchen floor, hidden there by the man who had stolen everything. Her dying father left behind and left her to disappear in the dark so no one would ever know. She had been down there for 4 months, and the world above had moved on without her. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, if you've ever witnessed something of yours being taken away without anyone lifting a finger to stop it, this story will touch you deeply and won't let you go. Subscribe, tap the bell icon, and leave a comment now so that those watching this story deserve to know they're not alone. Jacob Thompson was not a man who frightened easily. He had spent 11 years in the Montana high country, trapping through winters that broke lesser men riding ridgelines where the wind could knock a horse sideways, sleeping on frozen ground when the elevation wouldn't let him go any farther. He'd been charged by a grizzly once south of the Judith River and hadn't fired until he could see the color of the animal's eyes. Fear was something he understood. Fear was something he'd learned to fold up and put away, like a piece of old cloth, something you kept but didn't look at. So when the floorboard gave way under his boot heel on the night of July the 3rd, 1886, Jacob Thompson did not panic. He crouched down in the dark of the old Miller kitchen, pressed his hand flat against the warped wood, and listened. The ranch had been his for exactly 6 hours. He'd ridden out from Coldwater Basin that morning, with the deed folded in his coat pocket, a bill of sale signed by the Gallatin County clerk, and a wool bedroll strapped behind his saddle. Hector, his gray quarter horse, had carried him the 14 miles without complaint. Jacob had arrived at the Miller place just before noon, walked the perimeter of the property, the way a man walks when he's calculating, not admiring, and confirmed what the surveyor's map had promised. There was a spring-fed creek running along the eastern edge of the lower pasture. Clean water, year-round flow. That was the only reason he'd bid. The house itself was a wreck. 2 windows boarded over. The porch steps rotted clean through on the right side. A section of the barn roof had caved inward, and the corral fence was down in 3 places. Whatever the Miller family had built here, they hadn't been around to maintain it. The county auction listing had described the property as abandoned and in disrepair, which Jacob had taken to mean exactly that. Abandoned. Empty. Nobody's problem but his. He'd spent the afternoon doing a rough inventory of what could be saved and what couldn't. The barn's main structure was sound, which mattered. The well beside the house had good water tested clean when he dropped a tin cup down on a rope. The kitchen stove was an old Monarch range cast iron heavy as a courthouse, and it hadn't rusted through. He could work with that. By the time the sun dropped behind the western ridge and the temperature slid down, the way it always does in Montana, even in July, Jacob had unsaddled Hector, given him grain from the saddlebag, and started a fire in the hearth with wood he'd found stacked under a canvas tarp near the side of the house. The wood was old but dry. Whoever had last lived here, they'd been organized. He ate cold jerky and hardtack, drank from his canteen, and began walking the inside of the farmhouse with a lantern, taking his time. The front room was empty, except for a broken rocking chair and a curtain rod with no curtain. The bedroom had a bed frame, but no mattress. The second room, smaller, maybe meant for a child, had nothing at all. Jacob made notes in his head, the way he always did. What he'd need to bring out. What he'd need to order from town. He was a man who kept his planning in his skull, rather than on paper, which suited a life with no one to report to. And then he crossed into the kitchen. He was checking the stove flue for blockage when his right boot came down on the board that didn't belong. It wasn't the sound that stopped him. It was the feeling. The particular hollow give of wood over empty space. Jacob had lived in enough rough-built structures to know the difference between a floor with rot underneath and a floor with nothing underneath. This was the second kind. He stepped back, held the lantern low, looked at the floorboards. They were the same pine plank as the rest of the kitchen, same weathering, same gray color from years without oil or varnish. But there were 4 boards running in a different direction, perpendicular to the rest, forming a rectangle roughly 4 feet by 3 feet set, flush with the others. No handle visible. No hinges he could see from above. but the gaps between those four boards were a fraction of an inch wider than the gaps between any of the others. Jacob set the lantern on the kitchen counter. He pulled his belt knife, crouched, and worked the tip into the gap on the far edge of the rectangle. He pried upward. The section of flooring came up in one piece, hinged from the near edge where the gap was tightest, the hinges buried flat and painted over. Someone had built this to be invisible. Below was darkness and a set of wooden steps going down. Jacob picked up the lantern and held it over the opening. The steps were rough-cut lumber, 6 of them, leading down into a cellar space. He could see dirt walls, a dirt floor, and at the far end of the cellar, almost at the edge of the lantern's reach, a door. A real door, planked wood with iron hardware set into the earth wall. And there was a padlock on it. Jacob stared at that padlock for a long moment. A man who lived the way he did developed instincts, the same way he developed calluses, slowly, without ceremony, and without really noticing until they were already there. Right now, every instinct he had was telling him something that made no practical sense. Someone had built a locked room beneath this kitchen. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to make it invisible. He lowered himself down the stairs, testing each one before he put his weight on it. They held. The cellar was larger than it had looked from above, maybe 15 feet deep, 12 wide. The air was cool and damp, the kind of cool that meant the ground around it was holding moisture, maybe fed by the same spring water he'd come here for. There were shelves built along one wall, empty now. He could see old water stains on the dirt floor, the kind left by containers that had sat in the same place for a long time. He walked to the door. The padlock was new. That was wrong. Everything else on this property was old and neglected. The padlock was new. Jacob put his hand flat on the door and felt something he hadn't expected. Warmth. Not body heat exactly, but the particular retained warmth of a space that had been occupied recently. Recently enough that the air inside hadn't gone cold and dead the way everything else on this property had. He stepped back, drew his Colt, and said in a voice that was level and quiet, "Anybody in there, speak up." Silence for 2 full heartbeats. Then a sound like someone who had been holding their breath finally letting it go. And then a voice, rough with disuse, cracked at the edges but clear, "Please, don't leave me down here." Jacob did not move for a moment. His gun was still up. His mind was already sorting through explanations, someone hiding from the law, someone in trouble of their own, making any number of possibilities that did not end well for him or for them. "Are you alone in there?" "Yes." A pause. "Please, I'm not going to hurt you. I don't have anything. Please just don't leave." Jacob holstered the Colt. I didn't put it away because the situation was safe. He put it away because whoever was on the other side of that door, their voice told him something. His instincts agreed with this person was not a threat. This person was afraid. "I'm going to break this lock," he said. "Stand back from the door." He heard a scrape of movement from inside. He pulled a short iron bar from his belt. He carried it for fence work and worked it through the padlock shackle and levered it against the hasp. The hasp screws pulled out of the wood after 2 hard throws of his weight, and the padlock dropped into the dirt hasp still attached. Jacob opened the door. The space on the other side was small, 6 feet deep, maybe 8 feet wide. The walls were the same packed earth. There was a cot against one wall, a real cot with a wool blanket worn but present. A crate on its side serving as a table. On it a tin cup and a water pitcher. A small oil lamp burned down to almost nothing, still putting out a thread of light and smoke. And in the far corner, standing with her back against the wall, arms at her sides, looking at him with eyes that had no fear left in them, because fear requires energy, and she had spent hers, a woman, young, not yet 30. Brown hair matted and unwashed cheekbones showing more than they should, wearing a dress that had been clean once and was not anymore. Her hands were at her sides and her chin was up, and she was looking at him with the expression of someone who had decided some time ago that whatever happened next, she was going to face it standing. Jacob stood in the doorway and looked at her. She looked at him. "My name is Caroline Miller," she said. "My father owned this ranch, and whoever sold it to you did not have the right to do it." Jacob didn't answer right away. He was looking at her hands, her posture, the way she was holding herself. He'd found people in bad situations before: a trapper pinned under a fallen tree, a boy lost for 3 days in high country. There was something they all had in common: when you reached them, the moment of finding was when they fell apart, because it was safe to fall apart now. Caroline Miller was not falling apart. She was watching him the way a chess player watches the board. "How long have you been down here?" he said. "Since March." March. It was the 3rd of July. 4 months. "Who put you here?" Her jaw tightened. Not with grief, with something harder. "Vernon Hale," she said. "He's a lawyer, out of Bozeman. He was managing my father's estate after Papa died in February. He told everyone I'd left, gone east, he said. Nobody looking for me." A beat. "He needed me gone so he could sell the property without interference. He told me he had the legal authority to sell it. He doesn't. He had paperwork." "He's a lawyer," Caroline said flatly. "He had whatever paperwork he needed." Jacob looked at her for another moment. Then he looked at the room around her. The cot, the crate, the burned-down lamp, the water pitcher. "He was coming back to feed you." "His man Rudy came, every 3 or 4 days." A pause in which something flickered across her face and then was gone. "Until about 10 days ago." Jacob did the math on that without speaking. 10 days without anyone coming. 10 days of whatever food and water she'd had left when Rudy stopped coming. "You got anything left to eat?" "Crackers," she said. "I've been careful." He looked at her again. The cheekbones. The way she was breathing, controlled, deliberate, like someone managing their body's resources. "Come on out of there," he said, and stepped back to give her room. Caroline walked out of that cell and up the cellar stairs and into the kitchen of the house that had been her father's, and she did it without taking his hand, without stumbling, without making a sound. She stood in the kitchen with the lantern light cutting across her face, and she looked around the room at the stove, at the walls, at the boarded window, and Jacob watched her do it and didn't say anything. She turned to him. "You bought this place at auction?" "This morning. From Vernon Hale." "From the county. Hale filed the paperwork to have it auctioned as an abandoned estate. My father's will leaves this property to me." Her voice was steady. "There is a copy of that will in my father's Bible. The Bible was in the front room. Is it still there?" Jacob thought about the front room, the rocking chair, the curtain rod. "I didn't see a Bible." Something moved in her face. "Then he took it," she said, quieter now. "Or he missed it," Jacob said. "I only did a fast walkthrough. I haven't looked through everything." She was already moving, already walking out of the kitchen toward the front room with purpose, not waiting for him, not asking for help, not even looking back to see if he was following. He followed. She went straight to the fireplace, crouched, felt along the left side of the mantelpiece with her fingers and pressed something, and a section of the wooden surround swung outward on a hidden pivot. Inside the narrow space behind it was a black Bible, thick and worn, and a folded envelope. Caroline reached in and took them both, held them against her chest for a moment with her eyes closed. Then she stood and held the Bible out toward him. "Open it to the back," she said. "There's a document folded inside the back cover." Jacob took this Bible, opened it to the back, found the document, several pages folded together, handwritten, signed at the bottom by what looked like a notary seal. He read enough of it to understand what it was. "This is your father's will, signed and witnessed in January," she said. 6 weeks before he died. Vernon Hale was not present when it was executed. Papa didn't trust him even then." A pause. "Papa was smarter than people gave him credit for." Jacob held the document in both hands. He looked at it and then at her, and he said the thing that needed saying. "If this is legitimate, this property still belongs to you." "It is legitimate." "Then I don't own it." "No." Her eyes met his. "You don't." Jacob folded the will carefully and handed it back to her. She took it, and for the first time since he'd opened that door in the cellar wall, something changed in her expression. Not relief exactly, not gratitude. Something more complicated than either. The expression of someone who has been holding a wall up with their body for so long that when the wall finally stops pressing, They don't know what to do with their hands. I need to get you some food, Jacob said. Then we need to talk about what happens next. She looked at him as if she was trying to calculate something about him. What kind of man he was. Whether to trust him. Why? She said. He looked at her steadily. Because you've been in a hole in the ground for 4 months, and I've got food in my saddlebag, he said. And because whatever this situation is, it's bigger than both of us, and you need to eat before you can deal with it. She looked at him for another moment. Then she sat down on the floor of the front room, not in the broken rocking chair on the floor, like she'd run out of the energy required to care about appearances, and said, "All right." Jacob went to get his saddlebag. She ate slowly. Not because she wasn't hungry, he could see the hunger in the way she looked at the jerky and hardtack when he set it in front of her, but because she was disciplining herself. Eating too fast when you've been underfed makes you sick. She knew that. She was pacing herself. Jacob noticed this and didn't comment on it. It told him something about her. He sat across the room from her and let her eat in peace and thought about what she'd told him. Vernon Hale, Bozeman lawyer, had filed paperwork with Gallatin County to have the Miller Ranch auctioned as abandoned property following the death of the owner. Had, in order to accomplish this, locked the dead man's daughter in a cellar beneath her own kitchen for 4 months. Had presumably planned to let her disappear permanently once the property changed hands and he collected his cut. It was the kind of evil that came in a suit and carried a briefcase. The kind that wore a respectable face and knew which palms to grease at the county clerk's office. Jacob had seen it before. Not this exact shape, but the general outline. Men who understood that a dead man's land was vulnerable if the heirs could be made to vanish, and who had enough money and enough connections to make vanishing happen. "Tell me about Rudy," he said. Caroline looked up from the food. "What do you want to know?" "Everything." She thought about it for a moment, chewing deliberately. "His full name is Rudolph Crane. He's worked for Hale for years at least, probably longer. He's the one who came the night my father died." A pause. "Papa died in his sleep. He'd been ill since Christmas, his heart. I woke up and found him, and I sent the hired man Dorsey to get the doctor. Hale arrived before the doctor did." Her voice was flat, recounting this the way you recount something you've turned over in your head so many times, it no longer hurts you. It's just data. "He said he was there to help, to handle arrangements. He said Papa had asked him to manage the estate." "Had your father asked him to manage the estate?" "No." A single beat of quiet. "My father asked me to manage the estate. I am 27 years old. I have run this ranch since I was 19 when Mama died. My father trusted me completely." "Then how did Hale get the paperwork?" "I don't know exactly. I was only in the house with him for 2 days after Papa died before Rudy took me." She set down the piece of jerky she was holding. "I think Papa may have signed something when he was ill, when his mind wasn't fully clear. Hale visited several times in January and February. I didn't think anything of it." A beat that held something like self-reproach. "I should have paid closer attention." "You were nursing your father." "I should have paid closer attention," she said again, and the flatness in her voice told him this was not a line of discussion she was going to allow to become comfort. Jacob let it go. "What happened the night they took you?" "Rudy came to the door," she said. "He said there was a problem with one of the horses in the barn. A colic, he said. I went out. I shouldn't have gone without waking Dorsey, but I was half asleep and it sounded urgent." A pause. "Rudy is very good at sounding urgent, or maybe I was just tired enough not to think." She looked at her hands. "There were 2 other men waiting in the barn. I didn't know them. They put a hood over my head, and that was the last I saw of the outside until tonight. They brought you down to the cellar. They put me in the room. Rudy told me that if I made noise, they would hear it in the house, and nobody would help me anyway, because the house was going to be empty. He told me I should be grateful they weren't just shooting me." She said it without any particular emotion. "He left the lamp. He left water. He said someone would come every few days. I think they intended to keep me alive until the property sold and then let the situation resolve itself." "Resolve itself," Jacob repeated, and his voice was very quiet. "Yes." Meaning they'd stop coming. I believe so. The fire in the hearth popped and settled. Jacob looked at the will in her hands and thought about Vernon Hale in Bozeman, collecting a fee on a land auction, and about Rudy Crane who'd stopped coming 10 days ago, and about the particular arithmetic of a locked room and a dwindling water supply. He knows the auction happened, Jacob said. Hale. He would have been notified when the property sold. Yes. So he knows someone bought the place. Yes. And Rudy stopping coming 10 days ago, that's after the auction was scheduled. He worked through the timeline. The auction had been listed for the 23rd of June. He'd purchased the property. Rudy had stopped coming approximately 10 days ago, which put it right around the time the auction would have been confirmed. Caroline was watching him do the math. You think he's going to come back, she said. I think when Vernon Hale finds out someone bought this land, and that you weren't found when they came to take possession, he's going to want to know where you are. Or he'll assume I died in the cellar. Maybe. Jacob looked at her. Are you willing to bet your life on that? She didn't answer right away. Then, no. Then we need to think about this carefully, he said. We need to think about what documents we have and what we can get, and we need to think about what Hale can do if he finds out you're alive. What he can do, Caroline said slowly, is come back here with more men and make sure I don't stay that way. Yes. And you, she said. He'd have to deal with you too. Jacob looked at her across the firelit room. That's his problem to worry about, he said. Not mine. She looked at him for a long moment. Looked at him the way she'd looked at him from the corner of that cell, calculating, measuring, trying to determine what category of person he was. You don't know me, she said. No. You don't know if I'm telling the truth. You were locked in a room under a kitchen for 4 months, he said. I'm willing to extend some benefit of the doubt. Something shifted in her expression. Just slightly. I need you to understand something, she said. I'm not asking you to fight for me. I'm not asking you to take on whatever Vernon Hale decides to do. You bought this land in good faith, and that's not your fault, and I'm not... She stopped. Started again. I'm not a charity case. I have a plan. I've had 4 months to make a plan. I just need some help executing it. Jacob waited. The will, she said, holding it up. And the documents he filed with the county, they'll have inconsistencies. I know Vernon Hale's work. I know what he told people about me and what he couldn't have proved. If I can get in front of a judge... You'll need a witness, Jacob said. Someone who can testify to finding you here, to the condition of that room. She looked at him. Yes, she said carefully. I found you, he said. I can testify to everything I found tonight. Another silence, longer this time. Why? She said again, and it was the same question she'd asked before, but with more weight in it now. Mr. Thompson. Jacob. Jacob. You paid money for this property. Whatever happens with the legal dispute, that money is a problem for later, he said. Right now the problem is making sure you're safe and making sure Vernon Hale answers for what he did. He looked at her directly. I've been alone for a long time. I don't say that as a complaint. It's just a fact. And a fact that goes along with it is that I've had time to learn which things matter and which things don't. The money is not the thing that matters here. Caroline looked at him. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, All right, Jacob. And something about the way she said his name, just his name, nothing more, settled into the room, the way the firelight settled quiet and steady and warm. They talked until close to midnight. She told him everything she remembered. Names, dates, conversations. The meetings she'd overheard between Hale and her father in the last weeks before her father died. The specific wording Hale had used when he'd come to the house the morning after the funeral and begun talking about the estate as though it were already his to manage. The names of the 2 men in the barn that night, she hadn't seen their faces, but she'd heard Rudy call one of them Decker and the other by a nickname, Boots. Jacob listened and remembered. He didn't write anything down. He never wrote anything down. But he kept it all, filed it the way he filed the distances between landmarks on a trail, precisely and permanently. She asked him questions too. Not about his life, she wasn't making conversation. She asked about the auction process. Who had been present? What documentation he'd received? Whether there had been anyone else bidding? One other bidder, he said. A man named Peters. He dropped out when the price got to 400. Peters. She frowned slightly. That might be Gerald Peters. Hale's been friendly with him. If he was there to drive the price up and make the sale look more legitimate. That's a fairly specific kind of fraud. Vernon Hale is a fairly specific kind of fraudulent. She paused. Did you speak to him, Peters? A few words before the auction. He seemed to want to know why I was interested in the property. What did you tell him? That I wanted the water rights. She was quiet for a moment. That's what Papa was protecting, she said. The spring. Hale knows that water is worth more than the land around it in this part of the territory. There are ranchers who've been wanting access to that creek for years. Hale planned to sell it to the highest bidder once the property was his to sell. He doesn't have a clear title now, Jacob said. Not with this. He indicated the will. No, but he doesn't know we have it. She looked at the Bible in her lap. He may have thought he got everything. He's very thorough. He missed the fireplace. Papa built that hiding place himself, Caroline said, and for the first time there was something in her voice that was softer, something that wasn't about strategy or survival. When I was about 8 years old, he said a man with a family needed to have a private place. I thought he meant for Christmas presents. A pause. He hid money there sometimes, when things were hard. He said it was the last resort drawer. You only opened it if everything else was gone. Jacob looked at her. She was looking at the fireplace, not at him, and the softness in her face lasted only a moment before she pulled it back in and straightened her spine again. Well, she said, everything else is gone. Not everything, Jacob said quietly. She looked at him. He held up 2 fingers, counting. You're alive, and you have that document in your hands. She looked down at the will, then back at him, and for the first time very briefly, she almost smiled. It wasn't a happy smile exactly, more the kind you make when something is true and you needed someone else to say it out loud before you could let yourself believe it. We need to get to Bozeman, she said. We do. Hale will know I'm alive the moment I walk into a courthouse. Yes. He'll try to stop it. He'll try. She looked at him with those exhausted, clear, calculating eyes. Can you shoot? She said. Jacob looked at her. Yes, he said. She nodded once, like that settled something. Then we have a chance, she said. Outside, the Montana night pressed down on the old Miller ranch on the broken porch and the caved-in barn and the spring-fed creek running quiet in the dark. The fire burned lower. Hector shifted and stamped out in the lean-to where Jacob had put him for the night, and inside in the lantern light. A mountain cowboy and the daughter of a dead man sat across from each other with a stolen will between them, and neither of them said what they were both thinking. That the worst of this was probably still coming. That Vernon Hale was not the kind of man who let loose ends stay loose. That the morning was going to bring decisions that couldn't be undone. But they had tonight. They had the will. They had the testimony of a man who'd crouched down in a dark kitchen, pried up a hidden floor, and found a woman who should have been forgotten. And Caroline Miller, who had survived 4 months in a hole in the ground on crackers and iron, Will looked at the fire and let herself breathe. Just breathe. For the first time in a very long time, Caroline Miller let herself breathe, and Jacob Thompson sat across the dying fire and understood without either of them saying it that what was coming next would be harder than anything that had come before. He did not sleep that night, not because he was afraid exactly. Jacob had a different relationship with danger than most men, not fearless, but familiar. He understood it the way a rancher understands weather. You don't pretend it isn't coming. You don't waste energy dreading it. You read the signs and you prepare. What kept him awake was the thinking. The turning over of facts, the way you turn over soil before planting, looking for what's underneath. He sat by the hearth after Caroline fell asleep on the cot he'd dragged out from the bedroom, wrapped in his bedroll, because hers was down in that cellar, and he wasn't bringing it up. He sat and he thought about Vernon Hale. A man who locked a woman in a hole didn't do it on impulse. That kind of plan had layers, which meant Hale had people in the county clerk's office, or he wouldn't have gotten the auction paperwork through. It meant he had connections in Bozeman, maybe further. It meant he had done this before, or something close enough to it that he wasn't afraid of getting caught. Men who are afraid of getting caught don't leave a living witness underground. They eliminate problems. The fact that Caroline was still breathing told Jacob one of two things. Either Hale was squeamish about murder, or he'd calculated that a missing woman was safer than a dead one. A dead woman invited investigation. A missing woman just disappeared, and now Rudy had stopped coming. Jacob stared at the coals and worked that piece of the puzzle and didn't like where it landed. Rudy stopped coming 10 days ago, around the time the auction was confirmed, which meant one of two things. Either Hale had decided the situation was resolved and had written Caroline off as a problem that would solve itself with time, or, and this was the part that made Jacob's jaw tighten, Hale was planning to come back himself to make sure. Either way, they didn't have long. When pale gray light started showing through the gap in the boarded window, Jacob built the fire back up, put water on to boil, and found the small tin of coffee in his saddlebag. He moved quietly. He was a man who had always been quiet in the mornings, not from shyness, but from a sense that morning was a time that deserved respect. He heard Caroline wake up 15 minutes later. Not the slow, groggy waking of someone comfortable, but the sudden stillness of a person who's learned to come awake fast and stay quiet until they know where they are. He heard that stillness, and then he heard her exhale when she remembered. She came into the kitchen with her hair pushed back from her face, and her dress rumpled, and her eyes clear and alert, as though she'd slept 8 hours instead of 4. "Coffee," he said, and handed her a tin cup. She took it with both hands, drank, didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "You didn't sleep." "I slept some." "You didn't." She looked at him over the rim of the cup. "The fire wouldn't be that built up if you'd slept." Jacob looked at her. She was right. He didn't argue the point. "I was thinking," he said. "So was I." She lowered the cup. "Before I fell asleep, I was thinking about Dorsey. The hired man you mentioned. He's been working this ranch for 12 years. He's not a young man. When Rudy took me, Dorsey was asleep in the bunkhouse. I don't know what they told him. I don't know if he believed them." She paused. "Dorsey knew my father. He knew me. He knew this family." A beat. "If he's still in the area, he'd be a witness. He could testify to what my father's intentions were, what the ranch was." "Where would he be?" "There's a widow outside of Coldwater Basin, Mrs. Ellers. He used to do odd work for her between seasons. If he didn't find other work, he might still be there." Jacob turned that over. "Coldwater Basin is 14 miles east," he said. "I know where it is. I grew up here." He looked at her. There was no sharpness in her voice when she said it, just fact. She was a woman who dealt in facts. "Before we go anywhere," he said, "I want to check the rest of this property. Everything Hale might have searched, and everything he might have left behind." "You think he left something?" Men who commit fraud on paper usually leave paper behind. Sometimes because they're arrogant, and sometimes because they didn't think anyone would be looking. He set down his cup. "Your father built one hiding place we know about. You know this house better than anyone. Are there others?" Caroline was quiet for a moment, and he could see her thinking running through the house in her mind the way you run through a place you've lived in so long, it's stored in your body, not just your memory. "The barn," she said finally. "Papa kept records out there, in a tin box behind the third loose board on the east wall above the grain storage. He kept copies of land agreements, water rights agreements, bills of sale for cattle going back 20 years. She paused. Hale might not have known about it. He wasn't a man who worked with his hands. He wouldn't have thought to look in a barn. They went to the barn. The roof had caved in one section, but the east wall was intact, and Jacob counted boards from the floor, while Caroline watched the doorway behind them out of old habit instinct she'd developed in 4 months of listening for footsteps. The third loose board above the grain storage came out with a careful pull, and behind it was a tin box rectangular about the size of a Bible, latched but not locked. Inside were papers. A lot of papers. Land agreements dating back to 1871, when William Miller had first filed his claim. Water rights documentation signed by the county surveyor, a copy of the original deed, cattle sale records, and at the bottom, a separate folded document that had been written more recently. The paper was crisper, the ink less faded. Caroline took it out with careful hands and unfolded it. Her face changed. "What is it?" Jacob said. "It's a letter." Her voice had gone tight. "From my father to me, dated January the 19th. She read it to herself first. Jacob watched her read it, watched the muscle in her jaw, watched her eyes move down the page. When she got to the bottom, she stopped and held very still. "What does it say?" She looked up at him. "He knew," she said. "He knew Hale was trying to take the property." Her voice was barely above a whisper. He writes that he'd signed something in December when he was very ill. Something Hale brought to him and told him was a routine estate management document. But when his mind cleared in January, he realized what it was. He tried to contact the county clerk to retract it, but Hale had already filed it. She swallowed. "Papa writes that he's hidden the will and this letter, and that he's leaving everything to me, and that if I'm reading this, it means—" She stopped, and she pressed her lips together, and she looked at the letter in her hands with the expression of someone hearing a voice they'll never hear again. Jacob waited. She got herself back. He saw her do it, the breath, the straightening, the deliberate return to the surface. "He says if I'm reading this, something has happened to him, and I should know that the land is mine, and that I should fight for it." She looked up at Jacob. "He trusted me to fight for it." "Then we're going to honor that," Jacob said. She folded the letter carefully and put it with the will, 2 documents. Her father's hand on both of them, reaching forward from the grave to try to protect her. Jacob took the tin box, closed it, tucked it under his arm. "This all comes with us," he said. They went back to the house, and Jacob started loading what needed to go. He worked fast and methodical. The documents went into his saddlebag, wrapped in oilcloth against moisture. He checked his rifle, checked his ammunition, checked the Colt. Caroline watched him without asking questions, which he appreciated. She understood what the preparation meant, and she didn't need it explained. He was tightening Hector's cinch when she appeared in the barn doorway. "There's a rider on the south road," she said. Her voice was absolutely level. Jacob stepped back from Hector and looked at her. "One rider. One, coming slow, about a mile out." He moved past her into the yard and looked south. She was right. One rider walking his horse, not in any hurry. At a mile's distance he couldn't make out the face, but he could see the horse was a dark bay, and the rider sat heavy and wide in the saddle, the way a man sits when he's been riding a long time or carrying extra weight. "You know him," Jacob said. She looked for a long time. "Rudy Crane is big," she said, "and he rides a dark bay." A pause. "I can't be certain from here." Jacob looked at the rider, looked at the distance. "Get into the house," he said. "I'm not going back into that. Not into the cellar, into the house. Stay away from the windows." He heard her move behind him. Then he walked to the center of the yard and stood there with his hands loose at his sides, in plain view, waiting. The rider came on slowly. 100 yards out, Jacob could see the man clearly enough. Big as Caroline had said. A thick reddish beard going gray, a brown canvas coat despite the July warmth, a rifle across his saddle. He was not riding in like a man making a social call. He was riding in like a man checking on a situation. At 50 yards he pulled up. They looked at each other. "Help you," Jacob said. "Looking for the new owner." The man's voice was flat and careful. "Heard the Miller place sold." "You heard right. I'm the owner." A pause. The man's eyes moved across the yard to the barn, to the house, to the absence of anything unusual. "Name's Crane," he said. "I did some work for the previous owner. Thought I might see if the new man needed hands." Jacob looked up at him with an expression that gave away nothing. "Not right now," he said, "but I appreciate you stopping." Crane's eyes moved again, slower this time, deliberate. "House look all right to you when you came in? Sometimes these old places get critters." "House is fine." "Cellars sometimes where you get problems, moisture, foundation trouble." Jacob held the man's gaze and did not look away, and did not change his expression. I'll keep that in mind, he said. Something moved in Crane's face. A recalculation happening behind his eyes, fast and invisible unless you were watching for it. He was watching for something and not finding it, and the not finding was telling him something Jacob didn't want it to tell him. Well, Crane said. You need anything, I'm up at the Tanner Spread, just 5 miles north. Much obliged, Jacob said. Crane looked at the house one more time. Then he turned his horse and rode back the way he'd come. Jacob stood in the yard and watched him until the road curved and the rider disappeared behind the tree line. He counted to 30 after that. Then he turned and went into the house. Caroline was standing in the front room flat against the wall beside the window where she couldn't be seen from outside but could see through the gap at the edge of the boarded window. That was Rudy, she said. I thought so. He'll go back and tell Hale. Yes, and Hale will know you're not in that room, and he'll know someone's living here, and he'll come. Jacob looked at her directly. We have maybe 2 days, possibly less. She didn't flinch. She just nodded once. Then we can't wait, she said. We need to go to Bozeman now. Not Bozeman, Jacob said. Not first. He's got connections in Bozeman. We go to Bozeman with these documents and walk into the courthouse. Hale has enough friends there to slow us down until he can do something about it. He was thinking out loud, working it through. We need a lawyer who isn't connected to Hale, and we need that witness, Dorsey. Coldwater Basin. Coldwater Basin first. Get Dorsey. Then we ride to Helena. Helena is 3 days. It's the territorial capital. The court there is above Hale's reach. He looked at her. Can you ride 3 days? She looked back at him with an expression that was almost insulted. I've been sitting in a hole for 4 months, she said. I would ride 3 weeks if it meant putting Vernon Hale in front of a judge. Jacob almost smiled. Almost. We leave in an hour, he said. He let her use his spare shirt and his wool jacket. Her dress was not going to survive 3 days of riding, and there was no women's clothing left in the house. She disappeared into the bedroom with the shirt, and came back looking slightly ridiculous and entirely unbothered by it. The sleeves rolled up the jacket hanging past her hips. She'd braided her hair back tight. She looked nothing like a woman who'd spent 4 months underground. She looked like someone ready to move. They loaded what they needed. The documents in the oilcloth in the saddlebag. Jacob's rifle and ammunition. His food supplies. A canteen for each of them. He'd found an extra tin one in the kitchen. It took less than 40 minutes. Jacob put Caroline on Hector and led the horse out of the yard on foot, to begin with taking a route that kept them out of sight of the South Road. He knew the land from the surveyor's map at least roughly, and there was a route along the eastern creek bed that would get them to the Basin Road without crossing open country, where a rider watching from a distance could track their direction. You're not going to ask if I'm all right, Caroline said from above him after they'd been walking 10 minutes. Are you all right? I'm fine. I'm just most men would ask, repeatedly, and hover. Jacob looked up at her briefly. Would that help you? No. Then I won't do it, he said, and kept walking. She was quiet for a moment. You're an unusual man, Jacob Thompson. I've been alone long enough to stop doing things for appearances, he said. She considered that. That's either very freeing or very lonely, she said. Mostly it's practical, he said. He heard something in her breath that might have been a laugh quickly stopped. He didn't turn around. He just kept walking north along the creek bed with Hector's reins in his hand, and the morning sun still low, and the documents in his saddlebag, and 4 months of someone else's survival riding on his horse. They reached the Tanner Spread Road. The road Crane had mentioned, which told Jacob the man had been both confirming a cover story and giving himself a reason to be nearby, and Jacob cut well east of it, taking a deer trail through scrub pine that added 2 miles but kept them invisible. Caroline didn't complain about the extra miles. She didn't complain about anything. She did, however, ask questions. How did you end up in Montana? She said, after they'd been riding for close to 2 hours and he'd taken his turn in the saddle while she walked beside him. Came up from Wyoming about 5 years ago, before that Texas. What made you leave? He was quiet for a moment. A situation that needed leaving, he said. She accepted this without pressing. He noted that the way he was noting everything about her carefully, without making a production of it. "Why did you want land with a water source?" she said. "You could have settled creekside land anywhere in the territory." "The spring at your family's place comes out of granite at about 40 feet elevation above the lower pasture," he said. "Natural pressure. No pump needed in summer or winter. In Montana, water pressure you don't have to fight for is worth more than the land around it." A pause. "I wanted to run cattle eventually. You can't run cattle without reliable water. Papa always said the same thing." A quiet beat. "He used to say the spring was the reason the whole valley was going to be worth something one day. He was right." Another pause, smaller. "That's why Hale wanted it." They were quiet after that for a while. The trail climbed slightly through the trees, and the air was cooler here, good travel weather, and Hector moved with his usual steadiness. "Jacob," Caroline said. What Crane saw you being here, the house occupied, he'll report that to Hale. But he doesn't know what you found. He can't know for certain I'm alive." "No." So Hale's first move might be legal, not violent. He might try to contest the find, try to argue the will is forged. Jacob looked sideways at her. She was thinking the way she'd been thinking all night, he realized. Working through the layers. "You're right," he said. "A man like Hale goes to lawyers before he goes to violence. He'll try to bury us in paperwork first." "Which means we need to be in Helena before he knows to start," she said. "Once he files any kind of legal challenge, our case gets complicated. We need to get to a judge before he gets to a lawyer." "Then we pick up the pace," Jacob said, and clicked his tongue at Hector. They came into Coldwater Basin around midday. It was a small settlement, a general store, a livery, a saloon, a church, and a scattering of houses beyond. Jacob left Caroline at the livery with Hector, while he went to the general store to buy food supplies for the ride. He was back in 12 minutes. "Anyone see you?" he said quietly. "No one was looking," she said. They rode to Mrs. Ellers's place, a small farmhouse on the north edge of the settlement that Caroline directed him to from memory. An older woman opened the door before they'd even fully stopped the way. People in small settlements know a horse approaching before the horse announces itself. "Mrs. Ellers," Caroline said from the saddle. "I'm looking for Henry Dorsey. Is he here?" The woman stared up at her, stared for a long time. "Sweet Lord," Mrs. Ellers said. "Caroline Miller. We thought you were dead." "I know," Caroline said. "I'm not. Is Henry here?" He was. He came out from behind the house wiping his hands on a cloth, and when he saw Caroline, he stopped walking entirely. Just stopped 20 feet away and looked at her, and his face went through about 4 different things in 5 seconds. "Miss Caroline," he said, and his voice cracked on it. "Henry." She swung down from Hector without help and walked to him, and the old man grabbed her by the shoulders and held on, and she let him, which told Jacob something. She didn't let people hold on easily, but this man had known her since she was a child, and she owed him that. "They told us you left," Dorsey said. "Hale told me you went east. I didn't believe it, but I didn't know what else." "I didn't leave," she said. "I need you to listen to me carefully, Henry. I need you to come with us to Helena to testify." Dorsey pulled back, looked at her, then looked at Jacob. "Who are you?" "Jacob Thompson. I bought the Miller Ranch at auction." Dorsey's jaw worked. "In good faith," Jacob added. "I didn't know. I found Miss Miller when I arrived to take possession." Dorsey looked at Caroline again. Really looked at her, at the hollows in her face, at the borrowed clothes, at the particular quality that people carry when they've been surviving rather than living. "What did they do to you?" he said, quiet and terrible. "I'll explain everything on the road," Caroline said. "Can you come? We need to move today. We can't wait." Dorsey looked at Mrs. Ellers. Mrs. Ellers nodded. "Of course he can go," she said, the kind of voice that wasn't asking. Dorsey got his horse and his coat and his rifle, and was ready in 15 minutes. Jacob noted this. A man who moves that fast when he's needed is a man worth having. They rode north toward Helena. By mid-afternoon, they were well clear of Coldwater Basin, moving at a steady pace that 8 miles without punishing the horses. Dorsey rode beside Caroline, and she talked, filling in the months he hadn't known, keeping her voice flat and factual, the way she kept it when something cost her. He listened with the expression of a man storing things that would fuel him for a long time. When she finished, Dorsey was quiet for a solid minute. Then he said, "I saw Hale at your father's funeral. The way he looked at the property. I had a feeling then." A pause. "I should have stayed. I should have—" "You couldn't have known what he'd do," Caroline said. "I left you," he said. "Hale told you I was gone. You had no reason to—" "I had a feeling," Dorsey said, "and I ignored it." Caroline looked at him. "Then honor it now," she said. "Testify. That's what matters." Dorsey nodded slowly. They rode until the light started failing. Then Jacob found them a campsite in a stand of cottonwoods near a shallow creek off the main road, concealed enough to feel safer than open country. He made a fire small enough to not advertise their position, and they ate from his stores more of the jerky and hardtack supplemented by dried beans Dorsey had brought from Mrs. Ellers's kitchen. "Hale's going to move fast," Jacob said. They were sitting around the fire, the horses picketed nearby. "Crane saw me. He'll have reported by tonight. Hale knows the auction went through, and he'll know his insurance is no longer in place." "His insurance," Dorsey repeated, slow and angry. "The seller," Caroline said. Dorsey's jaw tightened so hard Jacob could see it from across the fire. "We have 2 days on him," Jacob continued. "Maybe less. If he rides hard, he could reach Helena before us. If he telegraphs ahead—" "He'll try to get there first," Caroline said. "File something. Make us look like we're bringing a fraudulent claim." She was thinking fast. "Is there anyone in Helena you trust? Any contact?" Jacob turned this over. "There's a federal land office agent," he said slowly. "Tom Briggs. I met him in Wyoming 4 years back. He's straight. Federal," she said. "That's above Hale's connections. If we can get to Briggs before Hale files anything locally, Briggs can take our documents and refer them up. That removes it from Hale's reach entirely." Caroline looked at him across the fire. "You have a good mind for this," she said. "I have a lot of years of watching men like Hale operate in different forms," he said. "The specifics change, the methods don't." She was quiet for a moment. "Jacob," she said, and the way she said his name now was different from how she'd said it last night, slightly less careful. "When this is over, regardless of how it goes, what you've done for me already, I haven't—" She stopped, started again. "I don't know how to say this without it sounding like I'm keeping a ledger." "Then don't say it." "I need to say it." "You don't." "I do." She looked at him steadily. "Whatever happens at the end of this, I need you to know that you pulled me out of that cellar, and you didn't have to, and you've been treating me like a person with a brain and a plan, and not like a problem to be managed, and that matters to me more than—" She stopped again. "More than I know how to say." Jacob looked at her across the fire. There were a dozen things he could have said. He chose the truest one. "You would have gotten out eventually," he said. "You were the one who kept the will safe. You were the one who remembered everything and planned it out. I just opened a door." Caroline looked at him. "You opened a door no one else was going to open," she said. The fire crackled between them, and Dorsey was tactfully looking at his boots. And Jacob Thompson, who had lived alone in the mountains long enough to forget what it felt like to be seen clearly by another person, didn't have an answer for that. So he just looked at the fire and let the silence hold it. But later, when the other two were asleep and Jacob was taking the first watch, he sat very still and thought about a woman who had survived 4 months in a hole in the ground through sheer force of will and intelligence, and who had walked out of that hole and immediately started building a legal strategy, and who had looked at him tonight with eyes that weren't looking for rescue. She was looking for partnership. He wasn't sure in 11 years of living alone he'd ever had that. I wasn't sure what to do with it. What he was sure of was this: somewhere behind them, a man named Vernon Hale was learning tonight that his plan had unraveled, and whatever he did next was going to come fast and hard. And Jacob Thompson had never in his life walked away from something that needed protecting. He settled his rifle across his knees and watched the dark beyond the trees, and didn't sleep. He settled his rifle across his knees and watched the dark beyond the trees, and it was 3 hours into that watch, somewhere past midnight, with the fire burned down to orange coals, that he heard the first horse. Not on the road. Off it. Moving through the trees to the west, slow and careful, the kind of careful that wasn't accidental. Jacob was on his feet before the sound fully registered, rifle up, moving to put himself between the noise and the two sleeping figures behind him. He didn't call out. He didn't wake the others. He just moved low and quiet, positioning himself beside a cottonwood trunk and waiting. The sound stopped. 30 seconds of nothing. Then it started again, closer, and this time he could hear two horses, not one. Jacob pulled the hammer back on his rifle with his thumb, slow enough that the click was barely audible, and held his breath. A voice came out of the dark, low and careful. "Hello, the camp." Not Crane's voice. Younger, uncertain. "Hands where I can see them," Jacob said. "Both of you. Then walk your horses in." A pause. Then two men emerged from the tree line, leading their horses, both with their hands raised chest high. Both young, neither looked older than 25. Trail-worn and wary, not the posture of men coming in with bad intent. One of them had a deputy's badge on his coat. Jacob did not lower the rifle. "Who sent you?" he said. "Nobody sent us," the one with the badge said. "Name's Deputy Aldrin, out of Meagher County. We saw your fire from the road. We're heading north and we're not looking for trouble." "Meagher County's 2 days south." "We've been riding 2 days," Aldrin said simply. Jacob studied them. Their horses were genuinely tired heads, low sweat dried on the necks. That wasn't performance. He lowered the rifle. "What's in Meagher County?" he said. "I am," Aldrin said. "Or was. I'm transferring to Helena. Court assignment." Behind Jacob he heard Caroline's voice. She'd woken at the sound of his first movement, which he'd half expected. "Let them come in," she said. He looked back at her. She was standing with her arms crossed, studying the two men with the same flat calculation she applied to everything. "You sure? A deputy transferring to Helena is exactly the kind of person we need to know about," she said. "Let them come in." Jacob stepped back. They came into the firelight, and Jacob rebuilt the fire enough to see by, and within 20 minutes, the situation had turned into something he hadn't planned for and couldn't have anticipated. Deputy Aldrin, it turned out, knew Vernon Hale by name. Not because he'd worked with him, because 18 months ago in Meagher County, a rancher named Foster had lost his property in what looked on paper like a legitimate estate sale, but had left Foster's widow with nothing. The attorney who'd handled the paperwork, Vernon Hale. The widow tried to contest it, Aldrin said. He was drinking coffee now, sitting across the rebuilt fire, his partner, a young man named Cass, who hadn't said more than 6 words, dozing against his saddle. She had a daughter about 12. She showed up at the sheriff's office with a whole pile of papers, and nobody listened to her. Hale had the right connections. A pause. "I listened to her. Spent 3 months trying to build something. Couldn't get it to stick. She lost the property." He looked at Caroline. "That's why I took the Helena transfer. I want to be where the territorial courts are." Caroline was very still. "What was the widow's name?" she said quietly. "Patterson. May Patterson." Caroline looked at Jacob. He looked back at her and understood exactly what she was understanding. They were not Hale's first. They were not even his second. There was a pattern. A pattern meant there were other victims, other documents, other people whose testimony could contribute to something larger than just the Miller Ranch. "Deputy Aldrin," Jacob said carefully, "what we tell you next is going to complicate your transfer." Aldrin looked at him. "Tell me anyway," he said. So they did. Caroline talked. Jacob added the pieces she didn't know. Dorsey woke up halfway through and filled in what he'd witnessed. Aldrin listened to all of it without interrupting once, which Jacob noted. A man who can listen that completely is a man who understands that what he doesn't know matters more than what he does. When they finished, Aldrin sat back and breathed out slowly through his nose. "You have the will," he said. "You have the letter from her father. You have the original deed. And you have 2 witnesses, Thompson and Dorsey, who can testify to separate pieces of this." "Yes," Caroline said. "And you're heading to Helena to file before Hale can move." "Yes." Aldrin was quiet for a moment. I'm a deputy, not a lawyer, he said. But I know that a federal land agent receiving these documents can hold any competing claims in suspension pending review. That's your window. He paused. I know Tom Briggs. Jacob looked at him sharply. How well? Well enough that when I show up with a territorial land fraud case, he'll see me same day. Aldrin met Jacob's eyes steadily. I'll ride with you. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Dorsey said with a rough and weary kind of gratitude, Son, you have no idea what you're walking into. I have some idea, Aldrin said quietly. I walked away from it once. I don't intend to do it again. They rode out before dawn. 5 of them now. Jacob, Caroline, Dorsey, Aldrin, and young Cass, who had attached himself to the group with the unquestioning loyalty of someone who goes wherever his partner goes. They made good time in the early morning cool. The road to Helena climbed, and the air thinned slightly, and the horses worked harder, but the pace was solid. Around mid-morning, Cass, who had the youngest eyes and the best distance vision, pulled up suddenly. Rider coming south on the main road, he said, moving fast. Jacob felt it before he thought it wrong. Too fast, too direct the particular urgency of someone with a purpose. Off the road, he said immediately. All of you, now. They moved into the tree line fast, and Jacob brought Hector in behind the others, and they stood still in the shadows and watched the road. The rider came through at a hard gallop. He passed their position without slowing, a man in a dark coat on a black horse, riding with the urgency of a telegraph message made physical. In the half-second, Jacob had to study him. He saw the set of the man's shoulders, the way he leaned forward, the quality of his coat. Not a trail coat, a town coat, the kind a professional man wore. One of Hale's, Caroline said. Flat, certain. Going south to cut us off, Aldrin said. Going south to get ahead of us, Jacob said. If Hale knows we're heading to Helena, he'd send someone by the south route to... He worked it through. There's a telegraph office in Townsend, 40 miles south. He could wire Helena ahead of us. Wire what? Dorsey said. What does he tell them? Caroline's voice was tight but controlled. He tells them that a woman claiming to be Caroline Miller has appeared with a man who bought the Miller property fraudulently, and that she's attempting to bring a false claim against a legitimately filed estate. She paused. He gets his version on record before we arrive. Then when we show up, we're already defendants instead of plaintiffs. The silence that followed this was the silence of people recognizing a move they hadn't seen coming fast enough. Can he do that? Cass said. He already has done things, Jacob said. We can't assume he can't do that. Aldrin was already thinking. If he telegraphs ahead, I need to get to Briggs before the telegraph reaches anyone in the federal office, he said. We push hard, no more stops. The horses, Dorsey started. We push until we need to rest, and then we rest fast, Jacob said. How far are we from Helena? Day and a half, Aldrin said. At the pace we've been going, if we ride hard, we can do it by tomorrow morning. Then we ride hard. They pushed. The next 10 hours were the kind of riding that strips everything down to the essential. No conversation for long stretches. The rhythm of hooves on packed earth, the shift of weight in the saddle, the body's argument with the demand being put on it, and the mind's refusal to acknowledge that argument. Jacob rode at the front and kept the pace, and watched the road ahead, and the ridgelines to either side, the way he'd learned to watch high country constantly, with most of his attention, because the thing that would matter would come from the place you'd looked away from. Caroline rode without complaint. He checked on her in glances the way he checked everything quickly, then away. She was pale by early afternoon, but her posture never broke, and when he slowed once to let the horses walk for 20 minutes, she came up alongside him. I'm all right, she said before he asked. I know. You were going to ask. I was going to let you tell me if you weren't. She looked at him sideways. You're very good at not doing things, she said. Takes practice, he said. Something crossed her face that was close to a smile, but went somewhere more complicated before it arrived. Jacob, she said. What Crane saw at the ranch Hale knows someone bought it. He knows his plan finished. But does he know what's in that cellar? What I told you. He knows you were in that cellar, Jacob said. He put you there. But he doesn't know what I know about him, about the Patterson widow, about the other properties he's moved through. I spent 4 months in that room with nothing to do but remember." She paused. "I heard things, before they locked me in. Conversations between Hale and Rudy. Names, dates, properties. I didn't fully understand what I was hearing at the time, but I've had months to put the pieces together." Jacob turned to look at her fully. "You know about other properties. At least 3 others, in the territory, possibly more." She held his gaze. "Hale isn't just stealing the Miller Ranch, Jacob. He's been running this for years. He finds properties with recently deceased owners' families with limited legal resources, no men to protect them. He creates paperwork, has it filed, converts the assets before anyone can challenge him. A beat. He's very good at it." "Until now," Jacob said. "Until now," she said. "But only if we can get in front of a judge before he buries us." Jacob turned back to the road. The weight of what she'd just said settled over him. This wasn't just the Miller Ranch. This was a pattern of crimes stretching across the territory. A man who had built a machinery of fraud and operated it for years with impunity, because his victims were always alone, always without resources, always too busy surviving to fight. Not this time. They stopped for 90 minutes at dusk. Watered the horses at a creek, ate fast, didn't bother with a proper camp. Dorsey fell asleep sitting against a tree for 40 minutes and woke himself up snoring, which broke the tension enough that even Caroline made a sound that was unmistakably a laugh before she covered it. Dorsey looked at her with startled eyes. "Never thought I'd hear that sound again," he said, soft and honest. Caroline looked away. "Don't make it a moment, Henry," she said, but her voice was gentle. Jacob watched this exchange and filed it the way he filed everything, and thought that the people who had known Caroline Miller before all this must have loved her considerably. They mounted again in the dark and pushed on. It was 2 a.m. when Cass, riding drag, called out sharply, "Riders behind us! Multiple!" Jacob pulled Hector up and turned. Through the dark. He couldn't see them yet, but he could hear them, the drumming of hooves on hard road coming at a pace that was not casual. 3 horses at minimum, possibly 4. Moving with the deliberate speed of men who knew where their targets were going and had decided to close the distance before those targets arrived. "How far?" Jacob said. "Mile, maybe less." Cass's voice was controlled, but young. Aldrin was already moving up beside Jacob. "He didn't telegraph ahead," Aldrin said quietly. "He sent men after us." "He did both," Caroline said from just behind them. "He's not stupid. He telegraphed ahead to control the legal angle and sent men after us to handle the problem if the legal angle doesn't work fast enough." Jacob absorbed this. "How many do you think?" he said. "Hale always travels with at least 2 men besides Rudy," she said. "So minimum 3, possibly 4. 3 or 4 against 5. And one of their 5 was a woman who hadn't been on a horse in 4 months and was running on adrenaline and will. Another was a man in his 60s, and a third was a 20-year-old who'd barely spoken." Jacob made the calculation. "We can't outrun them on tired horses," he said. "And we can't fight them in the open in the dark." He was looking at the terrain in his mind, the road they'd been traveling, what he'd noted in the daylight hours. "There's a ravine cut about 3 miles back. Deep enough. We split off the road they follow, or they don't, and if they follow, we're in ground we can defend. Or," Aldrin said, "I ride ahead. I'm a deputy. I have a badge. I ride into Helena. I get to Briggs before morning, and you 3 hold them here long enough for it to matter." Jacob looked at him. The idea was not wrong. The badge changed the dynamic entirely. A deputy arriving in Helena, with documented evidence of territorial land fraud, requesting a federal hold. Hale's telegraphed version would be competing against official law enforcement presence. That was a different fight. "Cass goes with you," Jacob said. "You need a witness to your own ride." Aldrin nodded. "You 3. Aldrin looked at Jacob, Caroline, Dorsey. "We'll slow them down," Jacob said. "Jacob," Caroline's voice beside him now. "I know." He looked at her. "I know what you're going to say." "Do you? You're going to say you don't want to be the reason men get shot." She was quiet for a beat. "That's part of it," she said. The other part is that I'm not going to hide in a ravine while you take—" "You're not hiding," he said. "You're the one with the documents. You're the one whose testimony matters. Testimony matters. If something happens to you, all of this ends." He met her eyes. "That's not about protecting you because you're a woman. That's about protecting the only person in this group whose knowledge of Hale's full operation cannot be replaced." She looked at him. Dorsey looked at her. She breathed in slowly. "All right," she said. "But if it goes wrong—" "It won't," Jacob said. She grabbed his arm, not gently. "If it goes wrong," she said again, "you run. You hear me? You run, and you don't look back. Aldrin has the documents. The case survives without you. So you run." He looked at her hand on his arm, and then at her face. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. She held his arm 1 second longer than she needed to. Then she let go. Aldrin and Cass broke away north at a gallop. Jacob listened to the sound of them go, and then turned his attention to what was coming south. "Henry," he said. Dorsey straightened. "You remember how to use that rifle?" "I've been using a rifle since before you were born, son." "Good. Get off the road to the east. Find a rise and hold it. You don't need to hit anyone. You need to make them think there are more of us than there are." Dorsey moved without another word, which Jacob appreciated. Caroline was still beside him. "You're not going to tell me to hide," she said. "No. Come with me." He led her and both their horses off the road to the west up a short slope to where the ground rose and gave cover an angle. He tied the horses in a hollow and moved up to the crest with his rifle, and she was right beside him, which he'd expected, and he didn't tell her to stay back. They lay in the dark and listened to the riders come. 4 horses. He counted the sound of them. 4. When they hit the place on the road below, where the 3 of them had turned off, the riders slowed. Jacob watched their shapes in the dark. 4 men, one well ahead of the others, the one in front, standing up in his stirrups, as though he could see further that way. "Road's cold," one of them said. The voices carried in the mountain night. "They were here." Another voice. "Look at the ground." They turned off. "Which side?" Silence for a moment while they looked. Jacob kept absolutely still. Beside him, Caroline was not breathing. Then the man in front said something low, and the 4 of them spread out, 2 going east and 2 moving west along the base of the slope. East meant toward Dorsey. Jacob tensed. A shot cracked from the east. Dorsey's rifle fired into the air from the sound of it, a warning shot. The 2 men heading east pulled their horses up hard and wheeled. One of them shouted something Jacob couldn't make out, and in the confusion, Jacob did what he'd planned. He fired once into the ground 20 feet in front of the 2 riders coming west, then moved immediately, 6 feet to the right, prone again, ready. The 2 riders broke and scattered, shouting to the others. In the dark, with shots coming from 2 directions, 4 men had no way to know if they were up against 2 people or 10. "Miller's the one we want," one of them shouted. "Don't waste time." "Which way did she go?" Another voice. Jacob fired again, east side of the slope, this time pulled back, moved north along the crest. This was the principle of it in the dark against uncertain opposition men with a job to do, default to caution. They don't charge what they can't see. Crane might be brave enough, but Crane didn't know where Crane's target was, didn't know the terrain, didn't know how many were up there, beside him. Caroline was moving when he moved, stopping when he stopped, not making noise. He hadn't told her to do this. She was doing it because she understood the principle. The 4 men below regrouped on the road. Jacob could hear them talking low and frustrated, but the words were lost. One of them kept trying to ride toward the slope and pulling back. Indecision. Good. 20 minutes passed this way. 20 minutes of controlled aggression, from above, false positions. Dorsey making noise from the east every few minutes to keep their attention split. 20 minutes during which Aldrin and Cass were covering ground north at a hard gallop. Then one of the riders below did something Jacob hadn't planned for. He pulled a torch, lit it fast, held it up, and the light threw the whole slope into pale orange visibility. Jacob went flat, heard Caroline hit the ground beside him without being told. There. One of the riders, the biggest one, Crane's voice unmistakably pointing up the slope directly at their position. They'd been seen. "Run," Jacob said, already moving. They went back over the crest and down the other side fast. Jacob grabbing Caroline's arm, not to help her, but to keep their pace matched. He heard Crane shouting behind him, heard the men starting up the slope on horseback, heard one horse stumble on the grade. They hit the hollow where the horses were tied. Jacob had Hector's reins in his hand and was pushing Caroline toward her mount before the thought was finished. "North," he said. "Hard as the horse has got." "Dorsey. Dorsey knows. Go." She went. Jacob threw himself into the saddle, and they were moving, all three of them converging on the road from different angles. Caroline from the west, Dorsey from the east, Jacob from the slope, and then they were on the road together and running, really running. Hector stretching out beneath him the way he did when Jacob asked everything. Behind them, the pursuit came on. Crane's voice shouting orders. Jacob couldn't parse at this distance, couldn't afford to parse. He focused on the road ahead, on the sound of the horses around him, on keeping their group together. Caroline was riding hard and good. Whatever 4 months had taken from her body, it hadn't taken her horsemanship. Dorsey was flagging his horse was older, and the old man didn't weigh nothing, and Jacob dropped back to ride alongside him to keep him in the group by presence alone. They ran for 3 miles. 3 miles at a full-out gallop that burned the horses down to the bone of what they had left. Jacob felt Hector's stride shorten, felt the labor in him, and knew they couldn't maintain it. But at 3 miles rounding a curve in the road, they saw lights ahead. Not 1 or 2 lights. A cluster of them. Yellow and orange and steady, the kind of lights that meant a settlement. And as they came around the curve, Jacob saw it, a small town, maybe 100 people still awake at this hour, because something had been happening in it. Something with lanterns, and men on foot in the road, and a building with a lamp burning in every window. A relay station. A large one with a connected way station that served the Northern Territorial route. And standing in the road in front of it, lantern in hand, was Deputy Aldrin. They'd ridden faster than Jacob had calculated, or Jacob's group had been slower. Either way, Aldrin was there, and behind him was a man in his 50s, with a Federal Land Office badge on his vest, who had apparently been at the way station for a different reason entirely, and had been found there by a hard-riding deputy with a story and a saddlebag full of evidence. Jacob pulled Hector up hard. The horse stumbled 1 step and held. Caroline came in beside him, breathing hard. Dorsey made it 5 seconds later. Behind them, the sound of pursuit was gone. The lights of the way station, the number of people visible. The presence of a man with a Federal badge. Crane would have seen that from the road, and made a decision that professional men who work in the dark tend to make when the dark suddenly has too many witnesses. He'd turned back. Caroline sat on her horse in the lamplight chest, heaving hair completely loose from the braid it had been in, looking at Tom Briggs with the most controlled expression Jacob had ever seen on a human face in extremity. Briggs looked at her, looked at the documents Aldrin was holding, looked at Jacob, looked back at Caroline. "You're William Miller's daughter," he said. "Yes. Aldrin tells me you've been held illegally for 4 months on property that was fraudulently processed through the Gallatin County court system." "Yes." A beat. "I can prove it." Briggs was quiet for a moment. "Vernon Hale sent a telegraph to the Helena Land Office this evening," he said slowly, claiming a woman presenting herself as Caroline Miller was attempting to file a fraudulent claim. No one spoke. "He got his version to Helena first." Aldrin set his voice tight. "He did," Briggs said. And then, after a pause that lasted long enough, that Jacob's hand moved toward the rifle on his saddle. "Fortunately for all of you, the man he sent it to in the Helena office is my brother-in-law, who knows my feelings about Vernon Hale, and had the good sense to hold it unacted upon until he could reach me." The silence that followed this was a different kind of silence entirely. Caroline's hand gripping her reins slowly loosened. "Your brother-in-law," she said carefully. "My brother-in-law," Briggs said, "who I have been trying to help build a case against Vernon Hale for the better part of 2 years." He looked at the documents in Aldrin's hands. "May I see those?" Caroline looked at Aldrin. Aldrin looked at Jacob. Jacob looked at Caroline. She swung down from the horse without help, walked to Aldrin, took the documents from him with both hands, and walked to Tom Briggs and held them out. "My father's will," she said. "His letter to me, the original deed, land agreements going back 15 years, and my testimony, which I will give in full under oath, covering not only the Miller Ranch, but 3 other properties. I have direct knowledge of that, were processed through the same scheme." Briggs took the documents. He looked at the will, looked at the letter, looked at the deed. He looked at Caroline Miller, at the borrowed clothes, the road dust, the 4 months of surviving written into the planes of her face, and his expression was the expression of a man who had been patient for 2 years and had just found the piece he'd been missing. "Miss Miller," he said, "come inside. We have a great deal of work to do." Caroline turned and looked back at Jacob, still standing by Hector, exhausted, trail-worn, one hand on his horse's neck, because the horse needed steadying, and steadying things was what his hands knew how to do. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully read. Something complicated and grateful, and something else underneath that neither of them had language for yet. "Are you coming?" she said. Jacob looked at her for a moment. Then he tied Hector's reins to the post, and he walked inside. He walked inside, and the moment Jacob Thompson crossed that threshold, the weight of 3 days and 2 nights settled onto his shoulders, all at once, the kind of weight that only arrives when you finally stop moving and your body realizes what it's been carrying. The way station had a main room with a long table and chairs and a wood stove going, and Briggs had his papers spread out before Jacob had even found a seat. Aldrin was beside him immediately, talking fast and low. Cass had stationed himself near the door, like a man who wasn't sure what his job was, but intended to do it anyway. Dorsey sat down heavily in the nearest chair and didn't move. Caroline stood at the table. She didn't sit. She stood and she talked, and Jacob watched her do it, watched her take everything she'd stored in 4 months of darkness and lay it out in the lamplight with a precision that made Briggs's hand move faster across the page, trying to keep up with her. Names, dates, properties, conversations she'd overheard between Hale and Crane, the specific language Hale had used when he'd visited her father in January. The phrases that had seemed like concern at the time, and that she now understood, were reconnaissance. 3 other families in the territory. The Patterson widow Aldrin had mentioned. A rancher named Gilmore, who'd died without a son, and whose daughter had been told the property had debts against it that didn't exist. A third name, Renner, a homesteader, where Hale had used a different method, a forged signature on a transfer document that the man hadn't been alive to dispute. Briggs listened and wrote, and occasionally asked a question so precise it told Jacob this man had been building this case in his head for years. He wasn't learning the shape of Hale's operation for the first time. He was filling in the specific details that had been missing, the human evidence that paper fraud always needs but rarely gets because the humans involved are either dead or gone or too afraid to speak. Caroline was not afraid. She was incandescent. Jacob sat against the far wall with his arms folded and watched her and thought, this is what she was doing in that cellar. Not just surviving. Preparing. Turning every memory over until she knew it completely, until it was organized and ready, until the moment she could use it. 4 months of cataloging Vernon Hale's sins in the dark. It took 2.5 hours. When she finally stopped, she was pale in the way of someone who has burned everything down to the last reserves and is now running on empty, but her voice had not wavered once. Briggs set down his pen. He looked at what he'd written, looked at the documents beside it, looked at Caroline. "Miss Miller," he said carefully, "what you've given me tonight, combined with what my office has been building independently, is sufficient to file for an emergency injunction against any transfer or legal action related to the Miller property and the 3 other properties you've named. It is also sufficient to request a warrant for the arrest of Vernon Hale on charges of fraud, unlawful imprisonment, and conspiracy." A pause. "I want to be honest with you about what comes next. Please," she said. "Hale has connections, not federal ones. That's his weakness, and it's why he's operated in county-level courts. But he has money, and money buys delay. This will not be resolved in a week. It will take months, possibly longer, to come to full trial." Caroline absorbed this without blinking. "I understand. The injunction I can file tonight by telegraph to the federal court in Helena. That stops any legal movement on the properties immediately. The warrant will take until morning. I need my supervisor to countersign." He held her gaze. "But Hale will know by morning that a federal warrant has been issued. And a man like Hale facing federal charges with the kind of evidence you've provided tonight has two choices." He paused deliberately. He can stand and fight it in court, or he can run. The room was very quiet. "Which do you think he'll do?" Jacob said from the wall. Briggs looked at him. "In my experience," he said slowly, "men who have been running this kind of operation for years maintain it by believing they are untouchable. The moment they discover they are not untouchable, they panic. And panicked men do one of two things." Another pause. "They confess, or they do something stupid." "Which is better for us," Caroline said. "Confessing is better for the case. The stupid thing is better for making sure he doesn't get away." Briggs looked at Aldrin. "I'll need you to ride to Helena at first light with these documents and the written warrant request. I'll have everything prepared within the hour." Aldrin nodded. "I'll go with him," Cass said from the door, which was the longest sentence he'd spoken all night. Briggs started writing immediately fast, the handwriting of a man who had done this many times. Caroline finally sat down in the chair Jacob had shifted closer to the table without making a production of it. She sat and she folded her hands on the table in front of her, and she stared at them. After a minute, Jacob came and sat beside her. Not across from her. Beside her. She didn't look at him, but something in her posture shifted the almost invisible relaxation of a person who hasn't been alone for the first time in a long time. "It's going to work," he said low enough that only she could hear. "You don't know that." "No," he said. "But you just gave that man 2 years of work in 2.5 hours. That counts for something." She was quiet for a moment. "He said it will take months," she said. "Yes. The ranch sits empty for months." "Or it doesn't," Jacob said. She turned to look at him. "What does that mean?" He met her eyes. "The injunction freezes any legal action on the property," he said. "It doesn't make it empty. Someone still needs to be on that land maintaining it, making sure Hale can't send men to remove evidence or damage the property before the trial." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're talking about going back?" she said. "I'm talking about the fact that the land needs looking after. You bought that land for the water source." "I bought it," he said. "The legal question of who owns it is for the court, but somebody needs to be on it." He held her gaze. "I know that land now. I know the spring, I know the water flow, I know what the barn needs and what the house needs. And I have nowhere else to be." The silence between them had a different quality than their earlier silences. Those had been silences of strangers in an emergency. This was something else. "Jacob," she said. "I'm not asking for anything," he said quietly. "I'm just saying the land needs tending, and I know how to tend it." She looked at him for a long time. "I'm coming back too," she said. "I know. It's my land. I know. I'm not going to stay in Helena while someone else—" "Caroline," he said. "I know." She stopped, looked at him. Something that had been held very tight in her expression loosened slightly. "All right," she said. Briggs worked through the night. Jacob dozed in the chair for 2 hours the way he could sleep in the field flat and fast and fully alert the moment anything changed. When he woke at 4 in the morning, Briggs had a full packet of documents ready for Aldrin and had sent a telegraph to Helena that had been acknowledged by the night operator at the federal office. Aldrin and Cass left before the sky showed any color in the east. The remaining 4, Jacob, Caroline, Dorsey, Briggs, waited. Waiting was its own kind of hard. Action had kept everything moving, kept the mind occupied. Waiting gave the mind room, and the mind, when it had room, went to the places it had been avoiding. Dorsey fell properly asleep across 2 chairs pushed together, his hat over his face, snoring with the magnificent indifference of a man who has done everything he can and is leaving the rest to fate. Jacob respected this deeply. Caroline did not sleep. She sat at the table with her father's letter in her hands, not reading it, just holding it. Jacob sat across from her this time, and he didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that would improve on silence right now. After a while, she spoke without looking up. "How is a good man?" she said. "My father, not always easy. He had a temper when things went wrong on the ranch. Not a mean temper, just a frustrated one. He'd go out and work until it passed. Mama used to say you could tell how the season was going by how late he worked." A pause. "After Mama died, he got quieter. He put everything into the land. He used to say the land was the only honest thing. It tells you exactly what it is and what it needs, and it doesn't pretend otherwise." Jacob was quiet. "He would have liked you," she said, and now she looked up. I'm not saying that to mean anything other than what it is. He respected men who didn't perform, who just did the thing that needed doing. He built a good hiding place," Jacob said. "A man who builds a hiding place that good loves the people he's hiding things for." She looked at him. "He hid that Bible and letter in February," she said. "He was very ill in February. He could barely get up the stairs." A long pause. "He made it down to the fireplace surround, and he hid those things for me, and he went back to bed, and 2 weeks later he was gone." Her voice was controlled and even, and completely raw underneath. He knew what Hale was going to try to do. He knew, and he couldn't stop it, so he did the only thing he could. "He made sure I had what I needed to stop it myself." Jacob looked at the letter in her hands and thought about a sick man on a winter morning working a hidden panel in a fireplace for his daughter. And he didn't say anything because there was nothing worth saying. "I'm going to make it mean something," she said. Not to Jacob specifically. To the letter. To the man behind it. "Papa, I'm going to make it mean something." The morning came slowly the way mornings do when you're waiting for them. And with the morning came news. The telegraph operator at the way station knocked on the door at 6:30 with a message for Briggs, and Briggs read it standing in the doorway, and his expression moved through 3 things in 4 seconds. "What?" Jacob said. Briggs looked up. "The federal court in Helena has acknowledged the injunction request and placed an immediate hold on all property transfers related to the Miller estate and the 3 associated properties." He paused. "And the Helena Sheriff's Office received an anonymous communication this morning regarding the location of Rudolph Crane, who was found at a boarding house on the south side of the city in the company of 2 other men whose descriptions match the riders who followed you last night." Caroline stood up. "Crane is in Helena. He was apparently sent ahead of the others by Hale, possibly to manage things on the legal side before you arrived." Briggs folded the message. "He is currently being held for questioning." "And Hale," Jacob said. Briggs paused. "Not yet located." The room absorbed this. "He ran," Caroline said. "Possibly." Briggs was careful. "Or he's still in Bozeman calculating his options. We don't know yet." "He ran," she said again, and her voice was certain. "He's been doing this for years because he always had a clear exit. He sees the federal warrant coming, and he runs." A beat. "Where would he go?" "That's what the Helena office is working on," Briggs said. "There are federal marshals. He has money outside the territory," Caroline said, and everybody looked at her. "I heard him tell Rudy. He talked about it like it was normal. He said he had accounts in St. Louis and one in Chicago. He talked about Chicago specifically. He said if things ever went sideways in Montana, he'd be in Chicago before anyone knew he was gone." Briggs looked at her. "You heard him say this." "I heard him say this to Rudy in March, before they put me in that room. He didn't know I was near enough to hear. He wasn't being careful." A pause. "He didn't think he needed to be careful." Briggs went to the telegraph immediately. Jacob watched Caroline watching Briggs write the message, and he recognized the expression on her face. It was the expression he'd first seen in the cellar doorway, the one he'd thought then was about being found. He understood now it wasn't about that at all. It was the expression of someone who has been holding a weapon ready for a very long time and has finally been given the moment to use it. Every conversation she'd overheard, every name, every date, every throwaway comment Hale had made within earshot of a woman he'd decided didn't matter. She had stored all of it. She had sharpened all of it. and she was deploying all of it now with the precision of someone who had never for one moment believed this day wouldn't come. The telegraph to Chicago went out at 7 in the morning. At 9 they rode for Bozeman. Not Helena Briggs made the decision based on where the legal action was centered. Hale's office was in Bozeman. His local connections were in Bozeman, and whatever paperwork needed to be formally contested needed to be contested where it had originated. Aldrin and Cass would handle the Helena end. Briggs would come to Bozeman with Jacob and Caroline and Dorsey and the authority of the federal land office behind him. It was a day's ride back south. A different road from the one they'd come up on, better maintained, safer in daylight. They rode through the morning in a configuration that had somehow sorted itself without discussion. Briggs and Dorsey ahead, talking in the low tones of men covering logistics. Jacob and Caroline behind, close enough to confer far enough apart that the space between them was comfortable. Around mid-morning, Caroline said without preamble, "Tell me about Wyoming." Jacob glanced at her. "What about it? You said you came from Wyoming. You said there was a situation that needed leaving." She was looking at the road ahead. "You don't have to tell me. I'm asking because—" A pause. "Because you know everything about me, and I know very little about you, and that's an imbalance I notice." He was quiet for a moment. "I had a partner," he said finally. "Not a wife, a ranching partner. We ran cattle together for 6 years in Wyoming. He made some decisions I disagreed with. Financial ones. Decisions that involved borrowed money from men who didn't lend money without conditions." He paused. "When it went wrong, I found out he'd been using my name on some of the agreements." Caroline turned to look at him. "He put your name on his debts," she said, "without my knowledge." A beat. "I spent 2 years working it out legally, paid what I could, left when it was clear staying wasn't going to help." He looked at the road. "I came to Montana because nobody in Montana knew my name yet." She was quiet for a moment. "And then you bought a ranch where someone had been committing fraud," she said. "Apparently I attract it." She looked at him, and the look had something in it that was trying not to be a smile and losing. "I'm sorry," she said. "About Wyoming. It was a long time ago." "It wasn't that long ago." He glanced at her. "No," he said. "Not that long ago." She turned back to the road. "The man in Wyoming," she said. "Your partner. Did you go after him legally?" "I tried." A flat pause. "He'd moved to Kansas by the time I had anything to bring, and the men he'd borrowed from had already found him." She absorbed this. "I'm sorry," she said again, quieter. "He made his choices," Jacob said. And then after a pause, "I made mine. I chose to work with a man I trusted and didn't verify. That's on me." Trusting someone isn't a failure. He looked at her. "No," he said, and something in his voice was different. "It isn't." She felt the weight of what he hadn't said and didn't push it, and they rode the rest of the morning in a silence that was easy in the way that silences between people rarely are. They reached Bozeman at dusk. Briggs had done his work during the ride. He'd prepared what he needed to file with the Gallatin County Court, had drafted the formal federal land office notification that superseded any county-level proceedings, and had his badge and his paperwork, and the particular quiet authority of a man who knows exactly what jurisdiction he's operating in. They went directly to the courthouse. It was near closing time, and the clerk tried to tell them to come back in the morning. Briggs put his federal badge on the counter and said very quietly, "The Federal Land Office does not keep county hours. I need to see whoever is on duty." They were seen in 10 minutes. The county judge who came out was a man named Harker, 60-something, gray and careful, who looked at Briggs and then at the documents and then at Caroline with the expression of someone who is rapidly reassessing the evening he thought he was going to have. "Vernon Hale filed a complaint with this court this morning," Harker said. "By telegraph." "I know," Briggs said. "I need that complaint suspended pending federal review." "The complaint alleges—" "I know what it alleges," Briggs said. "I also have the original will, the original deed, a sworn statement from the deceased's hired man, documentation of 4 months of unlawful imprisonment, and evidence of a fraud operation that extends to 3 other properties in the territory." He set everything on the judge's desk. "The federal injunction has already been filed in Helena. This is notification to this court that all proceedings related to the Miller estate are now under federal jurisdiction. Harker looked at the papers, looked at Caroline. Miss Miller, he said slowly, I signed the order approving the auction of your family's property in May. I was told by Vernon Hale that you had gone east, Caroline said. Yes, I know what he told you. A long silence. I was deceived, Harker said. You were. Her voice was level, not unkind. He's very good at deceiving people. That's not a statement about your judgment, Judge Harker. He deceived my father, and my father was not a foolish man. A beat. But I need you to help fix it now. Harker looked at her for a moment longer. Then he picked up his pen. It took 2 hours. 2 hours of Harker writing orders, and Briggs countersigning, and Caroline providing details, and Jacob sitting in a chair near the door, making sure nobody came through it who shouldn't. Dorsey sat beside him, awake now and watchful, the rifle he'd carried from the Miller ranch across his knees. At 8 o'clock in the evening, Judge Harker set down his pen, looked at the stack of orders he'd just signed, and said, The sale of the Miller ranch is hereby vacated. The property reverts to the estate of William Miller pending probate with Caroline Miller as the designated heir under the terms of the authenticated will. He looked at Briggs. The 3 associated properties will require separate proceedings, but I'm signing the holding orders tonight. Briggs gathered the papers. Caroline stood very still. Jacob watched her from across the room. He watched the moment travel across her face. The moment when a thing that has been fought for becomes real, when the fighting stops and the reality has to be let in. He'd seen it before that particular look. He'd seen it on men coming out of hard country after too long. The strange disorientation of having arrived. She didn't cry. He'd half expected that she would not weakness just the release of an enormous pressure. But she didn't. She just stood with her hands at her sides and breathed. And then she looked at Jacob. He looked back. It's yours, he said. She nodded once. It's mine, she said, and the 2 words cost her something and gave her something at the same time. Briggs was already moving toward the door, organizing the next steps with the efficiency of a man for whom this was the beginning of the process, not the end. Dorsey followed him. Harker retreated to his office, and Jacob and Caroline were momentarily alone in the judge's anteroom in the quiet after the work was done. Your money, she said. What you paid at auction. The county will return it. Briggs had explained this during the ride. Vacated sales return the purchase price. And the water rights, she said. The spring. That's why you came. Jacob looked at her directly. The spring is on your land, he said. That's where it belongs. She was quiet. You could negotiate for access, she said carefully. Water rights. A formal agreement. That would be it, something Papa did with neighbors. It would be legitimate and... Caroline, he said. She stopped. I didn't go back to that ranch because of the water, he said. The words settled in the room, and neither of them moved. Outside, the sounds of Bozeman in the evening, a horse. A door, voices down the street. The ordinary world going about its ordinary business, indifferent to the extraordinary things happening in a county courthouse anteroom. Caroline looked at him. Why did you go back? She said. Quiet, direct, the way she asked everything. He took a breath. Because the ranch felt like something when you were in it, he said. Because I spent 11 years alone and didn't know it until I wasn't. He held her gaze. Because you needed someone to help you get here, and I find that I am not ready for that to be finished. She looked at him for a long moment. That is the most words I've heard you say at once, she said. Don't get used to it. She almost smiled. Fully this time. The real one he'd been catching edges of for 3 days. I make no promises, she said. A beat. Jacob, she said. I don't know what any of this looks like. I don't know what I'm going back to, what the ranch needs, what the legal process is going to take out of me over the next months. I don't know. She paused. I have never in my adult life made a decision based on something I felt, rather than something I could reason through. I don't know how. That makes 2 of us, he said. She looked at him. Then I suppose, she said slowly, We figure it out." The door opened and Dorsey leaned in. "Briggs wants us," Dorsey said. Then he looked at the two of them standing close in the lamplight and had the profound tact to immediately look somewhere else. "Whenever you're yes. Whenever." He disappeared back through the door. Caroline turned and followed him. Jacob stood still for one more moment in the empty room, in the silence left behind by everything that had just happened, and felt something shift in him that he hadn't felt shift in 11 years. Then he walked out after her into the lamplit evening, and the Miller Ranch was waiting, and the spring was running clean in the dark of the eastern pasture, and everything that was going to come next was going to come. He found he was ready for it. And everything that came next arrived faster and harder than either of them had anticipated, because Vernon Hale, as it turned out, had not run to Chicago after all. He'd run to Bozeman. Briggs got the news at 9 o'clock that same evening, 20 minutes after the courthouse orders were signed, from a deputy who came in off the street with the particular urgency of a man carrying information he doesn't fully understand but knows is important. Hale had been seen at the telegraph office on Main Street 2 hours ago. Then at the livery. Then at the hotel where he kept a standing room, where the clerk reported he'd come in, gone upstairs, come back down with a leather satchel, and walked out without paying his bill. "He's still in Bozeman," Briggs said. "He doesn't know the orders are signed," Jacob said. "He knew the federal warrant was coming. He telegraphed his version to Helena this morning, then came here to manage the county side." Briggs was already moving toward the door. "He thinks he still has time. He thinks the county court is his, and the federal process will take weeks." "He doesn't know about Judge Harker," Caroline said. "No." "Then we have a window," Jacob said. "Narrow one." Briggs looked at the deputy. "Find the sheriff," he said. "Tell him a federal warrant has been issued for Vernon Hale, and the man is currently in this city. I want every exit watched inside the hour." The deputy left at a run. Jacob turned to Caroline. Her face was doing the thing it did when she was processing fast, very still on the surface, working hard underneath. "He has the satchel," she said. "What's in it?" Jacob said. "Everything he'd want to take if he was running. He keeps his most important documents in a leather satchel. I've seen it in his office. Financial records, correspondence." She paused. "Evidence." "Evidence against him," Briggs said sharply. "Evidence of everything," she said. "His version of events, his financial records, correspondence with county officials. If he destroys that satchel before we find him—" "Don't let him find a fireplace," Jacob said, and he was already moving. He didn't wait for Briggs to organize it. He went out the courthouse door and onto the street and stood in the evening air and thought the way he thought in high country when he was tracking not about what he wanted to find, but about what the animal wanted. What did Hale need right now? He needed to be gone. He needed money he could carry. He needed a route out that wasn't watched yet. The livery was already visited, the telegraph office done, the hotel done. But a man leaving Bozeman in a hurry with a satchel full of papers didn't just need a horse. He needed someone he trusted to ride with him, because a man alone on a dark road with everything he owned was vulnerable. And Crane was in Helena. So who did Hale trust in Bozeman? Jacob went back inside. "The auction," he said to Caroline. "The other bidder. Peters. Gerald Peters. You said Hale was friendly with him." She straightened. "Peters has a house here," she said immediately. "On the north side, near the creek." Jacob looked at Briggs. Briggs was already reaching for his coat. They went on foot, the three of them. Briggs, Jacob, and Caroline, who nobody suggested should stay behind, because by now, everyone understood she would not. Dorsey stayed at the courthouse with the signed orders, which was the most important job of the night, and Jacob told him so. And the old man accepted this with the dignity of someone who knows when he's been given a real responsibility, and not just been managed. The walk to Peter's house took 8 minutes. Briggs was fast for a man his age. Caroline was faster. Jacob matched her stride and didn't comment on it. They were half a block away when they saw the light in the downstairs window and 2 horses tied at the post out front. And Jacob put his hand out to slow the others without touching them, a gesture like you'd use with a horse. They stopped. 2 horses, Briggs said quietly. "Peters and Hale," Jacob said. He went to Peters first. He needs money or a route. Or both, Caroline said. Peters has contacts north, toward Canada. A beat of silence. I heard Hale mention it once. He said Peters had done business in Canada. He said it like it was useful information. Jacob looked at the house, the window, the horses. If he gets north of the territorial border tonight, the federal warrant becomes considerably more complicated, Briggs finished. Yes. Jacob looked at him. How do you want to handle this? Briggs was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. I'm going to knock on the front door, he said. I am a federal land office agent with a signed warrant, and I am going to knock on the front door. And if they don't open it? Then you stop being polite, Briggs said, and there was something underneath his careful professional voice that was not careful at all, and Jacob respected it. Briggs walked to the front door and knocked. Nothing for 10 seconds. He knocked again harder. Peters, Federal Land Office, open the door. A sound from inside. Movement. A voice too low to make out words. Jacob had positioned himself to the right of the door, back against the wall, out of the direct line of the entrance. He felt Caroline move in behind him close, and he shifted slightly to keep her behind his shoulder without making a gesture of it. The door opened. The man who opened it was not Peters. Vernon Hale was shorter than Jacob had pictured him from 4 months of Caroline's descriptions. Medium height, soft in the way of a man who'd never done physical work. Dark hair going silver at the temples. A face that had been built to look trustworthy and had spent years being used for exactly that. He was wearing his coat. The leather satchel was over his shoulder. He was ready to leave. They'd caught him in the last possible minute. He looked at Briggs and something moved across his face. Not fear exactly, but the rapid recalculation of a man realizing that what he thought was a manageable situation has just changed categories. Then he looked past Briggs and saw Caroline, and everything else left his face. For a moment, nobody moved and nobody spoke, and the night held them all in place, like figures in a photograph. Then Hale said very quietly, "Miss Miller." "Mr. Hale," Caroline said. Her voice was absolutely steady. "I'd like my satchel back. I believe you have documents in there that belong to my father's estate." Hale's jaw tightened. He looked at Briggs, at the badge, at Jacob at the rifle Jacob had not raised, but was holding in a way that communicated its availability. He looked back at Caroline. "You can't prove," he started. "I can prove everything," she said. "I've been in a room with nothing to do for 4 months, but remember it." A pause. "Every conversation, every name, every property, every official you paid to look the other way." She let that land. "Judge Harker signed the orders 2 hours ago, Mr. Hale. The Miller Ranch is mine. The injunctions on the other 3 properties are filed, and federal marshals in Chicago have been notified of your accounts there." The blood left Hale's face so completely that Jacob could see it happen. "Chicago," Hale said. "You told Rudy about it in March," she said. "You were standing outside the cellar door, and you told him what your exit looked like. You didn't know I could hear you." A beat. "You made the same mistake with me that you make with everyone. You decided I didn't matter, that I wasn't worth being careful around." Hale stood in the doorway and said nothing. "The satchel," Briggs said. Not loud, not aggressive. The voice of a man who has all the authority he needs and is simply exercising it. "Now." Hale's hand moved to the strap. He looked at Jacob. Jacob met his eyes and did not look away, and did not move. Hale took the satchel off his shoulder and held it out. Briggs took it, behind Hale from somewhere inside the house. Gerald Peters said, "Vernon, what's happening?" His voice had the quality of a man who has recently made a decision he's already regretting. "Mr. Peters," Briggs said, raising his voice to carry inside. "I'd recommend you stay where you are, and don't complicate this evening any further." A long silence from inside. "Yes, sir," Peters said. Briggs handed the satchel to Jacob, who held it, and then Briggs reached into his coat and produced the warrant paperwork. "Vernon Hale," he said. "By authority of the Federal Land Office and the Territorial Court of Montana, you are under arrest for fraud, forgery, unlawful imprisonment, and conspiracy. You have the right to counsel, and you will be transported to Helena for processing." Hale looked at the warrant. He looked at it for a long time. And then, without any drama, without any final argument, without any of the calculated performance Caroline had described, from months of watching him operate, Vernon Hale seemed to simply deflate. The professional posture left him. The trustworthy face became just a tired face, a man who had run a very long con for a very long time and had finally arrived at the place all cons arrive if you run them long enough. He put his hands out. Briggs produced cuffs, and Caroline watched this happen from 6 feet away, with her arms at her sides and her chin level and the expression of a woman who had promised something to a letter hidden in a fireplace and was now in this moment delivering on it. The Bozeman sheriff arrived 11 minutes later with 2 deputies. He took custody of Hale with the slightly dazed efficiency of a man who has just had his evening reorganized by federal authority and is adapting quickly. Peters was interviewed on his front porch and demonstrated his intelligence by cooperating completely and immediately, which Briggs noted in his paperwork with the neutral language of a man deciding to be generous. The satchel contained, as Caroline had predicted, everything. Financial records going back 4 years, correspondence with county officials in 3 different counties. A ledger that listed properties' dates and what Briggs described in the understatement of a man who had seen a great deal in his career as irregular income. The Patterson widow's case was in there documented from Hale's side, showing exactly how he'd moved the property. Gilmore's daughter, the Renner homesteader, and 4 more names Jacob hadn't heard before. 4 more families that Briggs's expression when he found that page suggested would be the subject of a great deal of federal attention in the months to come. They walked back to the courthouse at 11 o'clock that night, the 4 of them, Briggs and Jacob and Caroline and Dorsey, who had stationed himself on the courthouse steps with his rifle and a thermos of coffee that Mrs. Ellers had packed and that he was now distributing with the hospitality of a man who has just survived something and intends to mark it properly. He handed Caroline a cup. She took it and looked at him, and for a moment on the courthouse steps in the November dark, something passed between the old ranch hand and the young woman he'd known since she was a girl, learning to ride something that didn't need words and didn't use them. Then Dorsey looked at Jacob. "Well," he said, "you bought a fair amount of trouble when you bought that ranch." "Appears so," Jacob said. "You planning to stay with it?" Jacob looked at Caroline. She was looking at her coffee cup, but he could see the corner of her mouth. "I'm considering it," he said. Dorsey nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he'd already decided. "Good," he said, with the economy of a man who considers that to be all that needs to be said on the subject. They stayed in Bozeman 2 more days, while Briggs completed his filings and arranged Hale's transport to Helena, and processed Peters's statement, and did the dozen other procedural things that the law requires when a years-long fraud operation gets unraveled in the space of 48 hours. Jacob and Dorsey found a livery for the horses. Caroline went with Briggs to 2 of the 3 depositions she needed to give, and came back each time with the hollow-eyed look of someone who has been required to revisit things they have already survived, but came back nonetheless. On the second morning, Aldrin arrived from Helena with Cass behind him, and the news that Crane had confirmed under the particular pressure of a federal interview room. Everything Caroline had said, and several things she hadn't known. Crane was not, it turned out, a loyal man. He was a practical one, and the practical calculation of Rudolph Crane, facing federal charges in a territory where he had no friends and no money and no satchel of emergency funds in Chicago, was that cooperation was his best available option. "He's giving them names," Aldrin said. He looked like he hadn't slept in Helena, which he probably hadn't. County officials in 2 counties. The clerk who processed the Miller auction. A judge in Meagher County, the one who handled the Patterson case. He paused. "It goes further than we thought." Caroline sat down when he said this. Not because she was weak, because the information required processing, and she was honest enough with herself to acknowledge when processing required sitting. "The Patterson widow," she said. "We'll have grounds to contest the sale," Aldrin said. "Yes, Briggs is already in contact." She looked at her hands. "How many families?" she said, and it wasn't exactly a question. "We don't have a final count yet," Aldrin said carefully. But Briggs thinks this is the largest territorial land fraud case since Montana became organized territory. The room was quiet. Then Caroline looked up. Then it needed to come apart, she said. Whatever it costs, however long it takes. She looked at Aldrin with something that was close to fierce. Make sure the Patterson family gets their case heard. Make sure they know what's happening. Will you do that? Aldrin looked at her steadily. That's why I took the Helena transfer, he said. Yes, I'll do that. They rode back to the Miller Ranch on the third day. Just Jacob and Caroline and Dorsey. Briggs had work in Helena that would keep him occupied for weeks. Aldrin had his transfer to complete. The legal machinery was in motion, unstoppable, now grinding through everything Hale had built with the indifferent momentum that federal authority generates when it finally decides to move. The ride back was not like the ride out. The urgency was gone. The horses moved at their own pace. The October morning was cold and bright, the kind of cold that makes the air taste clean, and the land around them was the same land it had always been, indifferent to the human drama that had just been run through it. Dorsey rode ahead again, as he had on the way north, giving them space without making a gesture of it. The old man was tactful in the particular way of someone who has watched people for a long time and understood what they need before they knew they needed it. Jacob and Caroline rode side by side. It's going to take months, she said. The legal process, the trial. Yes. The ranch needs work, real work. The barn roof, the fences, all of it. I know what it needs. She looked at him. I'm not easy to work with, she said. I have specific ideas about how things should be done, and I've been running this property since I was 19, and I don't... She paused. I don't easily defer. I noticed, he said. Is that a problem? He thought about it with the seriousness the question deserved. No, he said. I've been making my own decisions for 11 years with no one to account to. If someone pushed back when I was wrong, I might have made fewer mistakes. He paused. Having a person with specific ideas isn't a problem. It's a resource. She looked at him for a long moment. A resource, she said. It's a compliment, he said. From me. She turned back to the road, but the corner of her mouth was doing the thing it did. Jacob, she said after a while. What you said in this courthouse, that the ranch felt like something when I was in it. He waited. I want you to know, she said carefully, that I am a person who needs time, who doesn't move quickly toward things. Even things I want. She looked at her horse's ears. I'm telling you that not to push you away. I'm telling you so that you don't misread the slowness as absence. Jacob was quiet for a moment. I've been alone for 11 years, he said. I understand patience. She looked at him. Is that enough for you? He met her eyes. You've been in a hole in the ground for 4 months, and you came out ready to dismantle a criminal operation, he said. If I can be patient enough to let that person do things in her own time, I think I'll manage. She held his gaze for a beat. Then she turned back to the road, and she was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than the ones before. The quiet of something settled. They reached the Miller Ranch in the early afternoon. Dorsey pulled up at the gate and sat his horse and looked at the place. The broken porch, the caved barn roof, the corral fence still down in 3 places, and didn't say anything for a long moment. Caroline rode past the gate and into the yard and stopped in the center of it, the same place Jacob had stood 10 days ago, waiting for Crane to ride in, and she looked around at everything. The house, the barn, the well. She turned her horse slowly in a full circle, taking it all in. Then she swung down. She walked to the well, the one Jacob had tested on the first day, with a tin cup on a rope. She put her hands on the edge of it and looked down into it and stood there for a moment. That was private in a way Jacob recognized and didn't intrude on. Dorsey came and stood beside him. Her father built that well the year she was born, Dorsey said very quietly. Dug it himself, 12 feet down in clay soil. Took him 3 weeks. A pause. He always said it was the best thing he ever built. Jacob looked at the well, at Caroline's hands on the edge of it, at the way she was standing. She straightened, turned around. She looked at the house. "The kitchen floor needs to be repaired," she said. "Permanently. I want that cellar sealed." "Done," Jacob said. "The barn roof before winter." "Agreed. The east fence first. If we're going to run cattle in the spring, we need the east pasture secured before the ground freezes." Jacob nodded. "And the spring," she said. "I want to walk the spring line." "I'll walk it with you." She looked at him. "You know this land as well as I do now," she said. "You spent one day on it before all this started." "I read the surveyor's map 3 times before the auction," he said. "I know where the water runs." She shook her head slightly, not in disagreement, but in the way of someone who is recalibrating what they thought they knew about another person. "All right," she said. "We walk it tomorrow at first light." "First light," he agreed. Dorsey cleared his throat behind them. "I'll start on the kitchen floor," he said. "I've been thinking about that cellar since Bozeman, and I'd like to do something constructive about it." He went to the barn to find tools without waiting for an answer. Caroline watched him go. Then she walked to the house and pushed open the front door. Not tentatively, not with ceremony, just pushed it open, the way you push open the door of a place that belongs to you, and went inside. Jacob stood in the yard for a moment. He looked at the sky, at the mountains beyond the ranch, at the eastern pasture, where the spring-fed creek ran quiet and consistent through the cold. He thought about the surveyor's map he'd studied before the auction, about the water pressure he'd calculated about the cattle he'd intended to run. He thought about a sick man crawling to a fireplace in February to hide a letter for his daughter. I thought about a woman standing up in the corner of a 6x8 cell, arms at her sides, chin level, looking at him. Not with fear, but with the expression of someone who had been waiting for a door to open and was ready for whatever came through it. He picked up his saddlebag and went inside. The weeks that followed were the kind of weeks that don't make dramatic stories, but make real lives hard physical work in cold weather, the ranch revealing what it needed, the way a sick patient reveals symptoms one at a time. The kitchen floor came up and went back down, solid and seamless. The cellar beneath it filled with soil and stone, and sealed so thoroughly that no trace of it remained. The barn roof was repaired in sections, Jacob and Dorsey working from opposite ends, finishing 3 days before the first hard freeze arrived. The east fence went up post by post in ground that was getting harder every morning. Caroline worked. Not supervisory, not directorial. She worked alongside them, her hands learning the calluses back that 4 months in a cellar had softened. She was strong and she was precise, and she did not ask for consideration, which meant nobody offered any, and she didn't have to refuse it. Jacob noted that the 3 of them working together moved with the efficiency of people who had learned each other in difficulty, which was the fastest way to learn a person there was. The legal news came in pieces. Hale's trial date was set for February. Crane's testimony had been formalized. The county clerk who'd processed the fraudulent auction paperwork had resigned and was cooperating with the federal investigation. 2 of the other affected families had been contacted by Briggs's office. The Patterson widow, May Patterson, sent a letter to Caroline in November, 3 pages, in careful handwriting, that Caroline read alone at the kitchen table, and then folded and put in the drawer where her father's letter lived, and didn't talk about, and Jacob didn't ask. But that evening she came and sat beside him at the hearth, where he was reading a surveyor's report on the spring water flow, and she sat close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and she didn't explain it, and he didn't require explanation. Aldrin wrote from Helena. The case was being called the largest territorial land fraud prosecution in Montana history, which was accurate. Hale had hired lawyers who were very good, and who were costing him the Chicago accounts one by one, and Briggs wrote that this was satisfying in a way he didn't usually allow himself to find things satisfying. December came. The ranch was still in official probate. The legal process had its own clock, and it didn't run at human speed. But the injunctions held, and the property was stable, and the work they were doing on it was building something that would be there, regardless of when the paperwork resolved. On a morning in mid-December, after the first real snowfall of the season, Caroline came out to the barn, where Jacob was checking on Hector and the 2 horses they'd acquired in the fall for ranch work, and she stood in the barn doorway and said, "Deputy Aldrin sent a telegram this morning." Jacob turned. "Hale accepted a plea agreement," she said. His lawyers negotiated it with Briggs. He pleads guilty to all charges in exchange for a full accounting of every property he touched and the return of all funds and documentation associated with each case. A pause. He goes to the federal penitentiary in Illinois for 12 years. Jacob held very still. "And the properties," he said. "Returned," she said. "All of them. The full legal transfer to rightful heirs, processed through federal court, above the reach of any county official he might have corrupted." She paused. "The Patterson family gets their land back. Gilmore's daughter. The Renner estate." She stopped. "And the Miller Ranch." The barn was very quiet. Jacob looked at her. "It's done," he said. "It's done," she said. She was holding the telegram in one hand at her side, and she was looking at him with an expression that had all the complexity of everything they'd been through in it. The cellar, the road, the courthouse, the months of work and waiting, and underneath all of it, something that was quiet and strong and had been growing in the way that real things grow without announcement. He crossed the barn to her. He stopped close enough that she had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. "Your father's land," he said. "My land," she said. "Yes." She looked at him for a moment. "Ours," she said quietly and deliberately, the word landing between them like something placed not thrown. Jacob looked at her. At the woman who had been in a hole in the ground for 4 months and had come out with a legal strategy and a memory, like a court document, and a spine made of something that didn't bend. At the woman who needed time and said so, who didn't perform and refused to let others perform around her, who had cried exactly once that he knew of and had done it alone. He reached out and took her hand. She let him. They stood in the barn doorway with the snow falling quiet on the Miller Ranch, on the repaired fences and the sealed kitchen floor, and the spring running clean under the ice on the eastern pasture, and the land that William Miller had built and Vernon Hale had tried to steal, and Caroline Miller had fought back from the ground up, lay around them in the December white hole, and undivided and exactly where it had always been. Jacob Thompson had come to this ranch for water. He had found something that didn't appear on any surveyor's map, something no auction listing would ever think to mention, the particular and irreplaceable thing that happens when two people who have each survived their own version of alone finally find the one person who makes alone feel like a choice they no longer need to make. He held her hand in the cold, and she held his, and the Montana winter settled over everything they had built, and it was enough. It was more than enough.